so much you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time.
Welcome to Is It Bad for the Economy, the podcast where we explore whether Trump's economic policies are helping, hurting, or just a load of hot air. I'm Kobe Tyree, Democratic strategist trying to figure out how the Democrats can finally get credit for outperforming the Republicans on the economy. And joining me is the amazing financial practitioner, Banker Bill, who's doing some amazing work at a bank you've definitely heard of. Folks, we're recording this on Friday, December 12th, and we have to start with our all-time favorite topic, the Fed. Trump just gave an interview where he talked about two of the top candidates to replace Powell, Hassett and Warsh. We've discussed both of them on the pod before. Waller was kind of our favorite. We thought there was some chance that he was a real independent who'd stand up to Trump. Banker Bill's gone on the record that he really prefers Warsh to Hassett. I was seeing that on Kalshi, the betting markets, that Warsh's odds improved a whole 10% from 20 to 30%. Hassett's still the big favorite.
Based on what we've seen so far, I think it's ultimately going to be Hassett because he's the one that's the most loyal. I think that Warsh is a trial balloon because there may be some market factors where Hassett's not as seen as positively. That's what I think. When you asked me to rank them before, I thought the most competent, most ready to do the job was Waller, Warsh, Hassett. Most likely to get it was Hassett, Warsh, Waller. Waller's the establishment candidate. Waller is the most like Powell. He's a current Fed governor. He's a Republican. Trump's not going to fall for that again. He's going to go for the loyalty guy. Warsh, I think, is a trial balloon. He calls for regime change. He has some contradictory things in his past, not as bad, in my opinion, as Hassett. But, you know, his past was inflation phobia, history of opposing loose policy that would limit credibility for a dramatic pivot. He started at the Fed in 2006. He was the Wall Street inside guy during the 2008 crisis, worked closely with Bernanke. And then, you know, in 2011, he resigned before his term was up.
I remember asking you when we talked about this the first time, how Warsh has managed to stay in Trump's good graces despite being connected to Bernanke. But you reminded me at the time that it was a very strategic resignation.
I think Warsh would be a fine candidate. He's got the qualifications. If you want to criticize him, he's too close to banking. Okay, fine. Who isn't in this kind of industry? He seems pretty pragmatic. He's got crisis experience. You want to quibble over it? Bear it out in the Senate Banking Committee. If you go back in history, oftentimes you put the new Fed chair in there, the market challenges that Fed chair. And by challenges, you see pressure on rates to rise. We're going to challenge you by not buying treasuries. We're going to push those rates up and see what you'll do. How are you going to react? A little stress, first year on the job. How are you going to react? And it's not necessarily coordinated. This is worldwide market moving. Could be central banks challenging him, these Japanese hedge funds, right?
Well, you mentioned Warsh being close to banking. This decision is going to be made in May.
You notice it keeps getting pushed out, right? The choice. It was going to be October. Now it's going to be December. Now I'm not going to make a choice till January. Why? I don't know. Why?
Well, my question is, are we seeing any pushback? I'm surprised that we're not seeing Wall Street try and get a Fed chair who's going to be more loyal to them in the bottom line than to Trump. We know whoever's eligible now is going to be a questionable sycophant no matter what. But if we do see big business pushback, if we do see Wall Street pushback and demand somebody who is more neutral, what do you think that would look like here in the next 3 months? Or have you completely given up on seeing any sort of pressure campaign to get a better Fed chair at all?
That is a good question. If there's a market reaction at all, it would be on a push up in intermediate to long-term interest rates. So think 10-year and beyond. If there's an announcement that the pick is Hassett, I don't believe if the pick is Waller or Warsh or any other person not directly in the orbit of the president, would you see a reaction? I would think you may see an intraday move, couple day move, if ultimately the pick is Hassett or someone like him. I don't even know how they would react to Bessent, who says he doesn't want it. And I think that's a shrewd choice by him because he can exercise a hell of a lot more power at Treasury than he can at the Fed. There was a poignant observation you made that no one remembers a bad Treasury secretary. People remember a bad Fed chair. So, you know, he probably knows that.
I was also wondering how Trump ended up with Powell in the first place when we first talked about everybody involved here at the Fed. When we talked about Fed chair candidates, you actually had a dark horse, Steve Mnuchin, the previous Treasury Secretary. Recently, just in an interview, Trump said that he actually blames Mnuchin for choosing Powell in the first place. So maybe that's why we haven't seen Hollywood Steve here in a minute. I was surprised too, though, to hear Trump still pining for Bessent as the Fed chair. But yeah, I think Bessent's not doing well right now. His reputation's taken quite a few hits. I could see why he wouldn't want to necessarily double down.
They seem really tight. There's a lot going on in Treasury.
So before we get into the cut, Banker Bill put out a really interesting piece on the Substack, which you can find under Is It Bad for the Economy, just like everything else. isitbadfortheeconomy.com/ right there. And we hope you subscribe because we're trying to get more bonus content in there, especially from the anonymous Banker Bill. Before this latest Fed decision, he went to different popular AI programs and asked them to pretend to be the GOAT, Volcker, and ask whether Volcker would make a cut or not. There was actually an interesting spread of decisions there. Please go to the Substack and check it out. Again, subscribe and get all that bonus content for free. But Banker Bill, I think everybody was expecting this small rate cut. It sounds like the general consensus is that might be the last rate cut for a minute. But the big news story has been the dissent. What was your reaction to all the varying opinions? And do you think that this truly is the end of the unanimous Fed?
If you don't know, when they have these meetings, all 19 people show. That's the 12 bank presidents, the Fed chair Powell, and the Fed governors. Only 12 of them vote, and the Fed presidents rotate. I think it was 6 out of 19 favored no rate cut. But of voters, it was 2 favored no rate cut. Mirren favored a 50 basis point rate cut. They cut 25 basis points, right? So it was 9 to cut 25, 1 to cut 50, 2 to cut nothing. It shows that there's disagreement on where we are in the economic outlook right now. People with issues with inflation coupled with unemployment rising, there's consternation there. You would think they've got to be now at this latest cut down to 350 to 375 range. They've got to be neutral at this point. If you're not neutral right now, when is it, right? With inflation at 3%. In the Powell press conference, he was asked a question. And he actually gave up that if you X'd out tariffs, inflation in the low 2s, his words, the low 2s. So they are looking through the tariffs, right? But unemployment's ticking up, and you see that in the rate cut. Nonetheless, I would have stayed right where I was. We got to have credibility on inflation, and we are not in a recessionary condition on unemployment. But they don't even want to get there. And on that, I can't blame them.
I think a transparent Fed that has its agreements in public where we all can have our take is certainly a good thing. And you're right. Like the spread here isn't crazy, right? It's 4 notches, essentially. Like there's no major outliers here.
Right.
It is still disconcerting in this era of partisanship. What do you think is the bigger factor in all of these disagreements coming into public for the first time? Is it that the economy is just this complicated, or has partisanship finally come for the Fed? Has the last independent major institution just finally fallen to that tribalism?
I think everybody has their own opinions at the Federal Reserve. Whether they're presenting, everybody gets heard. And I do think there are myriad complications in the existing economy. You've got tariffs. You have an inflation condition that is over 2%. So you are above targets. You can quibble and argue over how much is impacting by tariffs. I don't know. That's ambiguous. You see unemployment rising. Nonetheless, you see 25 to 54-year-olds all want to work. In my experience, the people saying nobody wants to work are the very people that aren't working, the 55 plus. Their labor force participation's fallen off a cliff. The people that are under 25, the 20 to 24-year-olds, their labor force participation rate, which means their desire to work, is near all-time highs, at least going back in the last 30, 40 years. But their unemployment rate is relatively high. That's not good. That's especially not good because it's the young workers that are oftentimes the cheapest to hire and the hungriest that you could squeeze the most out of, but they're not hiring them. Meanwhile, real GDP growth seems to be 2% or better. Powell even said we're seeing productivity gains. We were seeing productivity gains before AI, according to him. There's a lot of ambiguity.
Another big reason to stay firm was that the Fed was operating somewhat blind. They don't have nearly all of that data they're used to because the BLS was, for large part, furloughed during the shutdown. They announced that they're not going to be putting out a CPI report for October either. Look, I think we were all expecting this. There's so much other data that it's not a complete catastrophe. My question is this the last we're going to hear of the missing October reports? Or is this going to be a thorn in our side for every financial decision that gets made in the next 1-2 years?
Nah, we'll move past it. It'll be a gap. We all thought, hey, some people thought we're gonna have a couple missed reports. They did get us almost an abbreviated September one. There were folks who didn't think we were going to get that. Consensus was kind of October was always screwed. We may go through all the same shit again when, the January continuing resolution?
There could be another shutdown in January. And that's why these healthcare negotiations that are happening in the House and Senate right now are so important. Unfortunately, we're going to be on shutdown watch again in just a couple of weeks. There is one exciting thing coming out of Washington policy-wise. The Department of Education came out with some clarification on some new rules around college loans. Banker Bill, this got you pretty excited.
This got me excited because we covered this months ago. It was the episode where we covered student loans. The Department of Education, under the Trump administration, they are going to flag any school up front for this prospective student while they are filling out their federal application for student aid. If that school has average earnings of its graduates below the average earnings of high school graduates, that student is going to be shown that right then and there. This is going to cover about 20% of all colleges out there. And we established together that there's a lot of bad colleges out there. Now, this builds off of a 2023 rule enacted at the Biden Department of Education, which covered trade schools. So the change for Trump is that now this is going to cover all schools that get any kind of federal funding. What makes this possible is the college scorecard, which was a creation of the Obama Department of Education. So continuity of steps in the right direction. Now, this isn't going to prevent students from going to that school. There are some people complaining that, maybe this school has some good programs, but in aggregate, we're not doing that well. That's not fair to us. To that, I say bullshit. If there's any mold on your bread, I don't want to eat it. So if you hit on this list, you need to create a better value proposition for your students academically and socially, such that when that student leaves, they make more than a high school graduate. And if you can't, you shouldn't get any federal funding or grants. If you still can't figure it out on your own, you should fold up. So it's not the broad-based reforms we wanted or we talked about in the college loans episode overall, where we really went in depth. But look, step in the right direction, continuity of good policy across administrations. And how often, Kobe, could you possibly say, thank you, President Obama. Thank you, President Biden. Thank you, President Trump.
I'm not saying thank you to anybody. Let's give it a year and let's see how this actually works out. I think that's a good policy to have, not just for Trump, but for any politician. Any big spending policy like this, give it a year before you decide whether it's success or failure. Let's stop celebrating these press releases. Just because you announce something doesn't mean you're going to actually follow through on it. Doesn't mean that it's actually going to work. There is a part of me that really doesn't like the fact that Trump has another cudgel to wield against higher ed, which he seems to be dismantling systematically.
How do you see this as a cudgel? I'm curious. Your earnings suck. I'm going to tell the student they suck. A role of the U.S. government, especially in a capitalist system, is to create transparency of information.
This is just another way for Trump to attack the universities. And I think, yes, it appears to be a good way that the president should be able to attack universities if it indeed does remain neutral. I don't want to make up a whole doomsday scenario here, but it's pretty easy to see a little federal funding here, a little pressure on that bank there, and all of a sudden the big picture gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah, more state capitalism. We don't want that. Instead, we want the government to create transparency so these universities cannot hide their outcomes.
Our big topic for today is the Trump accounts. And it was actually a specific request from listener Craig. He said, you guys got to do an episode on the Trump accounts bullshit. Keeping the bubble from bursting before the midterms by juicing index funds is a shockingly good idea. Now, I really appreciate Craig. And while I think we're going to dismiss his immediate concern pretty quickly, a lot of really interesting and important topics are going to come up here. But first, let's talk about the policy. We talked about it on our birth rate, our fertility issue a few months ago. At the time, my take was this is not a fertility incentive. That's ridiculous. The penalties for taking out the money when you turn 18 are just too onerous. Clearly, this is a Social Security privatization pilot.
This is the brainchild of a guy named Brad Gerstner, founder of an investment firm called Altimeter Capital. He's frequent on financial news networks. So you might not know who he is, but people who watch CNBC, Bloomberg, or Fox Business, they probably know who he is. He first hatched this idea in 2021, and a few years later, he founded this nonprofit called the Invest America Foundation. He'd been working on it for several years, and he even worked on it with the Biden administration, but ultimately it wasn't one of the Biden administration's priorities. His words, didn't get over the hill fine. Over the last several years, he's worked with Ted Cruz of Texas, Republican, and Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey. He wants kids to participate in capitalism from birth. And the way he's coming at this is he, in his own research, found that of all Americans that are born each day, only 75% will have any kind of account that compounds, whether that's an IRA or another type of retirement vehicle. So what he wanted to do is, how can we close the gap on that 25%? Let's do it for everybody. And he's calling it a change to our social contract on the order of magnitude to Social Security. So when you tie it to a privatization of Social Security, whether that's true or not is irrelevant. He's making that tie himself as the original architect of the program. So that's fair for you to come out, pull that piece out. I think that's reasonable. So Craig's point about the economics of juicing the stock market through index funds. Okay. This is the federal government now setting aside the first year, $3.6 billion for this. Okay. So that's $1,000 times approximately 3.6 million births that will occur. 3.6 billion. It is said that the money is going to invest in the broadest of US-based index funds. So what are the broadest index funds we can point to that are out there? We have VTI, the Vanguard Total Index, which has $560 billion under management. I'm not going to go through these one by one, but another one with $80 billion, another one from Schwab with $40 billion, and then we have the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the plan that the federal employees use, which has the C Fund of $430 billion and the S Fund, which is the S&P, of $119 billion. So to add $3.5 billion onto just these handful of funds, when you consider now the entire market in the United States,
we're not moving the needle before the midterms.
Not even a nickel.
You know, I have a child. I sign up for this program. What happens next?
Okay, so at least for this upcoming year, and you're already getting me into the complications here, mid-2026, based on what the government's saying, the parent is going to have to fill out Form 4547 with their upcoming tax return. Once you check that box and file that form, the government's automatically going to create an account for you. Now, if you wait until mid-2026, they say that they're going to have a website apparatus for you to apply through. The government's history in launching digital web pages is checkered, to say the least.
Trump's actively taken them away.
Sure. Or putting headers on them, right? But that's neither here nor there. Fine. They can figure that out. That's how you open it up. This is basically a traditional IRA with more strings and complexity.
You sign up for the program.
Yeah.
And what? You get a piece of mail with the bank account details and instructions on how to put more money into it if you want?
The money you'd put in is going to be after tax contribution, so it's not going to be deductible on your federal taxes. Just like a 529 isn't today. 529 is deductible on many state tax returns, but not in the federal. So they're similar in that way. And me saying this is basically an IRA with more strings and complexity is fair because the account at age 18 or whatever, if you leave the money in there, it's going to transition to an IRA.
That's exactly where I wanted to go next. What happens when you turn 18? I get the sense that there's going to be some penalty that tries to really encourage folks to keep that money in there until retirement. But have those details even been figured out?
No, we haven't gotten the rules on that. But look, you're right. At 18, what they're saying is there's going to be taxes. So if you pull the money out, there's going to be taxes. Now, what you owe depends on who put the money in, how old the person is when they take it out, and what the person's using it to do. Did you take it out to pay for school? Yes. Well, you owe taxes on the distribution. Now, did you take out $1,000? So you owe taxes on the $1,000. Fine. Did you take it out to buy a car? You owe taxes on the distribution of $1,000 plus a 10% penalty. But what if you waited to buy that car when you're 60? You owe tax, but now no penalty. If you put the money in and mix it with the government money and then take it out, your head will spin.
If there are any Senate staffers listening to this, I need you to spend some time running this thing through ChatGPT, talking to every accountant you know, trying to figure out every single little tax in here so that you can incorporate them into your next negotiation process as tax cut giveaways to the Republicans, because that's clearly where this is going. Every single one of these taxes will have a specific bill that breaks the tax at some later point so a Republican can appear populist. Democrats, let's get ahead of this. We all see where this is going. Every single one of these little things We have to offer them to the American people before the Republicans do.
You are getting detailed into one of my largest criticisms of this. And I think Brad Gerstner's aims here are noble. But this is creating yet a new political football that the government is funding with debt. This isn't like the government's got a savings account somewhere and we're going to distribute it to a bunch of kids for the future. We are borrowing this money to add it to an account so that the same people who are going to be the beneficiaries are going to pay for this debt later. Anyway, now if this comes in and you say you don't like it and you want to get rid of it because it's stupid and too complicated, your opponents are going to pitch you as anti-kid. And that's not true.
Yep, that's clearly where this is going. But is it government money? I thought we had a billionaire donor who was putting all the money in here himself. Is it the originator of the program that you've been telling us about?
No. So this is one of my, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this. This is, I think, a good thing about this program. You've got a guy, Michael Dell, the creator of Dell Computers. He's kicking in to these accounts of his own money, $6.25 or $6.5 billion. And he's going to take that money and give $250 to kids who are in zip codes with median household incomes $150,000 below.
Oh my God.
That's going to reach 80% of U.S. children in that range.
Great.
What are your views on this being a way for very rich people to very efficiently give away money to young people?
Until you mentioned that there was a condition on it, I was going to say it makes me uncomfortable, but I've got to let this one go. It's not the same as the White House one, which is clearly a corruption grift. It's not the same as whoever came in and paid the military salaries during the shutdown. Those are deeply troubling corruption, buying the military fall of Rome stuff. This is a charity vehicle. I have my opinions on it, but not in the same ballpark. If this money is going directly into Americans' pockets via these savings, retirements, investing accounts, then okay, not how I would have donated that money if I were a billionaire, but I'm not a billionaire, so I don't get to make that call. But now hearing that there are conditions on this, and of course, that condition sounds almost reasonable. It's a little unfortunate that we're having to make this consideration on a zip code level. But of course, I'm sure they looked at the alternatives and decided they were too complicated. But the fact that I, as a billionaire, can contribute to this and say it's only going to go to these kids and not that kid, I don't like that at all.
Right. Another thing that I'll add to what you said is his donation, in my view, contradicts the beneficiaries of the program because of how this is set up, that it's after-tax money. The people most likely to put their own money into this account are people with money. It's not people with incomes 150 and below. It could be some with 150, 140, 130, depending on where you live, right? But the idea that a household making even 90 grand a year, 100 grand a year is going to put $5,000 after taxes into this account or max it out is spurious to me, right? So it's mainly a new vehicle for incredibly well-off parents who may have maxed out 529 contributions or other tax advantage contribution accounts to now benefit from yet a new account, while Michael Dell is contributing directly to the kids who would ostensibly most need this. To your point, they're introducing new ways for people to cherry pick who gets the money. For example, you've asked what Gerstner's doing. Is he contributing? Yes, he's probably not as rich as Michael Dell. His contribution to this, he's saying, he's originally from Indiana. That's where he grew up. That's where he was born. He's going to kick in X number of dollars for every person born in Indiana.
And that's reasonable, right? That's reasonable. But we all see how this gets unreasonable very, very, very quickly.
It can.
I think your point about this being extremely convoluted and just another financial vehicle that parents have to save for, this being something that clearly middle and upper class families are going to take a lot more advantage of than the folks that this is supposed to help in the first place. This is one of those political hills that I have kind of just learned to let go. Yes, I wish we had a program that made more sense. I wish we had a program that was more efficient into delivering results for the people that it purported to help the most. But none of those things take away from the grandmother who's going to scrimp and save every penny to make sure that it goes to her grandson's retirement savings, right? So I share your concerns. And personally, don't like it, wouldn't vote for it personally. But if it's not making those folks at the bottom's life harder, then I'm ready to let that one go.
If I may be a cynical Democrat, which I'm not, but if I'm pitching this to a Democrat, which you are, Kobe, so I'll pitch it to you, is here, wherein a wealth tax remains elusive, here is a very efficient way for very, very rich people to give money away through a government vehicle that redistributes that money directly to the people you would think need it most. Doesn't help them today, helps them in the future. That's how I'd pitch it to you.
Before we get into the bigger picture here, you mentioned that our friend Craig might not want to contribute to these accounts for his kids. Why might that be?
Simply put, there's better options. 529 is a better option. Custodial IRA for my kid, even though I have to go do it and the government's not doing it for me. If I actually do it, it's a better option. I would sign up if I'm eligible just to get the additional $1,000. But would I contribute any more of my own money on top of that? No. Would I lobby my employer to contribute? Absolutely. To me, it's a gimmick. And the best part of it is that it's a way for very, very rich people to pass money directly to kids. Who are the potential losers for this? Nonprofits. Because if I want a cheap, easy way to give money directly to people, this may be a more compelling option.
Any other president, I would be a cynical conspiracy theorist for saying this. But Trump finds a way to turn every single government lever into a weapon against his enemies. Is there a world in which Trump is able to say, hey, Disney, screw you for not canceling Jimmy Kimmel. I'm going to take you out of the Trump account index fund if you don't take Kimmel off the air?
That's a trap question, right? You know the answer to that is yes. And we have precedent for it. Look at the whole ESG stuff. These people were complaining because a fund like a Vanguard would create a fund based on customer demand to say, hey, I only want a fund that doesn't include oil companies. I only want a fund that doesn't include cigarette companies. What's to say the government comes in and says, I don't really like how you're doing A, B, C, D, do E or you're out. Is it really an index fund in that way? Again, you're creating a vehicle for manipulation. It's yet another way for the government to get involved. It's yet another account, Colby, I have to manage because my 401k, my HSA, the IRA, the 529, that's not enough. Now I need the Trump account too. So beyond this, the best thing we could do for our child's future is to get the budget deficit in order, not eliminate it, reduce the national debt so that to ensure that they have healthy food, health care, and the ability to reason and do some math. But if you tell Mike Dell to donate $5 billion to cut the deficit, why would he do that when the government's spending $1.5 trillion more than it brings in a year? I'd rather give it directly to these kids. Maybe they can manage it a little bit better. The government can't. But to take it back to the original point, it's a new IRA.
Well, it sounds like our official podcast opinion on this is a unenthusiastic meh. Just doesn't seem like a battle worth fighting. Some people are going to benefit from this, and not a lot of people are going to suffer, except for, like you said, the nonprofit consultants. So maybe I've got a little bit to worry about here. In summary, no, we are not worried that these Trump accounts in any way, shape, or form are going to manipulate the stock markets going into the midterms. But the reason why I wanted to spend so much time talking about this is because you've said before, how bad can the stock market be? How bad can the economy be when we're all pumping so much money into our retirement accounts at the end of the month? There is this institutional positive force operating on the foundation of the economy. The big question I want to ask you is, has that volume of money become so numerous that it is contributing to our perceived divergence of profit and stock market value? Is the reason why we all feel like the stock market is valuing hype more than ever and profit less than ever the fact that we're all pumping this money into the stock market every month because that's what we're supposed to do?
Yes and no. I mean, some of this, what you're really getting at is the wealth effect, which is that wealth begets wealth. And as you see your account go up, you're willing to spend a little bit more money. Now, the gravy train keeps running unless the money doesn't get contributed anymore. And how does the contributions dry up is unemployment. And if you're contributing every week or every 2 weeks to your 401k or your IRA plan and into an index fund, and you lose your job, you're suddenly not contributing into your index funds anymore, to your IRA. At some point, a critical number stop contributing, and that creates a negative feedback loop instead of a positive feedback loop. And ultimately, if it gets bad enough, people start pulling on those accounts early, right? Because they have to make ends meet, right? They have to liquidate their 401k. They have to pull money from a IRA, even if it means paying a penalty. At least while people are employed, the contributions directly into those accounts are a tailwind for equities or any other, beyond equities. I mean, look at the speculation and other things, cryptocurrencies, Pokemon cards, or even certain cars. There's only one way this works out, right? You contribute the money, you don't look at it, and then you come back in 20 years, and there's a very good chance based on history it's going to have shown to done very well. This goes sideways a few different ways. One of them is, suppose we started this proposition 18 years ago. Every kid's going to get the $1,000. 18 years ago was 2007, right before the financial crisis. Stocks are at all-time highs. Now, had you done that today in VTI, the most broad index, Vanguard Total Index, that $1,000 would be worth $4,700 with no further contributions. It could be a good little Kickstarter fund for someone who's, I don't know, wants to go to trade school, or maybe you wait a few more years and you graduate college, and that's how you pay your first month's rent, last month's rent, plus deposit. Little seed money, right? But look what you had to go through to get there. You open these accounts, and a year later is 2008, and that account's now about half of what it was. And you could imagine, among everything else we went through in the financial crisis, the hysteria and panic, especially among politicians, of yada, yada, you open up these accounts and now they're not worth anything and we wasted all this money and da-da-da-da. Nonetheless, wait over time and it compounds and it all worked out. But the whole way of that money going up and to the right over time, you're going to have to put up with the hysteria that is market volatility. Your future returns are a byproduct of that volatility, right? No risk it, no biscuit. Again, it's the political football.
Am I just foolish for thinking that pumping this much money into the economy, if we did scale this, if this did approach Social Security levels, that it wouldn't fundamentally change the economy? Or is it a one-time bump and 40 years of growth or 40 years of growth, and if you're not getting a good return on that, then our country's screwed anyway?
You're asking a really challenging question. Social Security is beyond just a mere pension scheme. It's an annuity scheme. It's a disability scheme. When Social Security came into effect, what was it, 1940-ish? We did not have the asset or the investment options that we have today, or even had 30 years ago. It's a totally different thing. Now, if you were to mix some privatization, if you were to keep Social Security taxes as they are, and you were to invest some of that money into a index fund over time, I am confident, without even doing the analysis, that you'd be better off than just on Social Security alone, because Social Security compounds at like 2% per year. You ever heard of the 60-40 portfolio? 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Social Security is basically a 100% bond annuity that hasn't done very well. Now, if you go all the way to the extreme and privatize the whole thing, you're subjecting yourself to market gyrations. And anybody in financial planning, I'm not even in financial planning, right? I'm in finance, but in banking, knows that your sequence of returns risk, which is a very fancy way of saying when you invested the money and when you take it out, matters a whole lot. The amount of money that somebody had if they retired in 2008 is much different than the amount of money they had if they just waited 3 more years and retired in 2011. So you need something like an annuity program to an extent, whether that's bonds or some other kind of vehicle, that creates a buffeting impact, right? To buffer out those changes or market volatility. Because ultimately, even though you would make more for sure over time, you can't just say that's the best way to go, right? Because we're not living on a spreadsheet.
I remember my grandmother telling me she grew up dirt poor in Mississippi just after the Depression. She was alive for it. She doesn't remember it. I remember her telling me one time about how incredible it was that all of a sudden old rural farm workers were able to retire in dignity, and how absolutely revolutionary that was on the back end of the Depression. Their kids were guaranteed a better life in old age than they were able to receive. I think that is one of the greatest things that we've accomplished as a country. One of the New Deal's biggest legacies, and something that we shouldn't take for granted. So I think we need that backstop of the federal government, of Social Security. I would like to see this program stay at its current scale and not be touched for 20 years and then see where we're at. But of course, that's probably not going to be an option for all the reasons that we talked about. So let's give it as long as we can before we stop fiddling with it and just see how it goes. All of the concerns that we've raised aside,
I think we are headed to some manner of privatization because it's going to be a necessity. Social Security was initially conceived as a program where you have fertility rates comfortably above replacement rate, comfortably above 2. We are now comfortably below 2. Unless you have more people paying into the scheme or more people making more money paying into the scheme, in its current form, it's not going to work out. And it would have already not worked out had we not funded Social Security as we are today and every day with deficit spending. We're taking on debt to fund Social Security, which, hey, that runs for as long as it does. But I do think ultimately, without some kind of changes, we're probably going to run into a scenario where to some extent we have to either cut benefits or privatize in some way.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I think underlying a lot of folks feel a lot of discomfort, a lot of unease about the fact that we live in an economy where, for example, Tesla is worth 4 or 5 times what Toyota is worth.
Yeah.
That seems wrong. I'm not a stock market analyst. I know that future earnings potential, all that kind of thing. It seems to me that this economy is operating on far more hype versus profits than it was before. And it seems like it's going in the wrong direction. Is that world just gone? Is it all just going to be hype and future earnings? Was I wrong for ever wanting to live in a world where Toyota is worth a lot more than Tesla?
You're bringing up a lot of salient points, and we're beyond the initial scope of the Trump accounts. But look, these companies that are out there now, I mean, they're the S&P 500 profit margins, I think all in are something like 13 or 14%. The margins are pretty good. And as long as the margins stay good, people are going to tell you in finance, and to a large extent, you'd have to agree with them. It's not hype. They're making the money. The money's coming in. Participate. Now, our profit margins stretched in the S&P 500. So over the last 20-year average, they're above a standard deviation of what they normally are. So their profits right now are particularly good. In the financial crisis, they weren't. In COVID, they weren't. And now they are again.
Folks, thank you so much for listening to Is It Bad for the Economy? Thank you so much to Craig for the question. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk about the topics that matter most to you. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition. It takes a little time